Michael A. Yoder served in the Army during the Vietnam War, his service starting on December 27, 1963. His highest rank was E9, and he held this title for many years before his service ended in 1997. He served at bases in America, Korea, and Vietnam. Yoder was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in 1945. He was one of 5 children, and he had a brother who also went into the service. He didn't graduate high school before entering the Army, but picked up his GED while he was in the service. Yoder was interested in joining the Army because he wanted to jump out of airplanes. When he first joined, he traveled to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, where he started his basic training. Yoder also completed infantry training in Fort Jackson, then signed up to be a paratrooper and went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. When he graduated, he also volunteered for Ranger School. Yoder had training in many different areas, including airborne training, ranger training, cryptography training, chemical, nuclear, and biological warfare training.
You're up at 4:30 in the morning. You would go out, you would do your physical training, what they call PT, your push-ups, your sit-ups, your jumping jacks, your squat thrusts. And we only ran like 4 miles then.
The hardest part for Yoder was climbing the rope, although everything else was easy. Yoder says there was a particular instructor that stood out to him.
Gentleman from World War II, who was a paratrooper. He was the epitome of an NCO, non-commissioned officer, takes care of his soldiers. And he was very dedicated to taking care of his soldiers, even though we were in the Army a little bit in the 60s where you didn't have some of that.
He says the hardest part of training was when it rained for 3 days straight.
We were all soaked, hungry, and then you crawl through the pits and they fire weapons over top of you. Your normal training to get you ready for advancement.
Yoder was qualified with the M1, N14, and the carbine in basic training, then with the machine gun in infantry training.
The first time you were out with live ammunition, a little scary. After that, it became commonplace. And that's because the NCOs that took us through the training, 99% of them were combat veterans from either Second World War or Vietnam. And they were patient with us and helped us.
During specialized training, Yoder was the center man in the squad.
I was the swivel. I had an automatic weapon. I was an automatic weapons man. I carried an M14, which was fully automatic with bipods. And my job was to keep scanning from right to left constantly when we were maneuvering for targets of opportunity to keep my fellow soldiers safe.
Failure wasn't an option for any of the soldiers training with Yoder. They all strived to be at the top. During the Vietnam War, the Army didn't send everyone to Ranger School, so Yoder was being trained in a special skill. They had a lot of extra soldiers going through training with them.
We had some West Point cadets going through school with us. We had ROTC cadets going through school with us. And then there were the regular infantry soldier.
Ranger School was very physically demanding. Out of 107 people, 58 failed.
So Ranger School was very taxing, and you learn to go with less sleep than you needed. You learn to go with less food than you needed, but you learn to, Rangers lead the way, so you learn to keep moving.
Although it was difficult, Yoder was going to keep moving through Ranger School no matter what.
I was going to make it if I had to drag my body through the mud on my hands and knees. There was no way I was not going to finish. And my fellows, the other soldiers that were with me, and that was our sentiment. We didn't care. We were going to make it. They sent us there. We were going to complete it.
During his service, Yoder was part of the Bayonet Division.
7th Infantry Division, hold your bayonet high. That was their motto.
Their main objective was to patrol the demilitarized zone. They made sure no one was sneaking through the piece of land between North and South Korea. He spent about 7 months in Korea, then got moved to Vietnam. In Vietnam, they were doing basically the same thing that they did in Korea, long-range reconnaissance patrol. They were a group of about 5 men with backups for each in case someone got hurt.
Once you put together a group of people like we were, you really didn't want an outsider coming in, because I could look over at my buddy Wayne, and I knew exactly what he was going to do when he was going to do it, or vice versa. It was very intense, because you only have a couple people, and everything you did depended on them people. So you were very close to them.
During their missions, the division had to keep as secret as possible.
We weren't John Wayne. We didn't run in and do any of that silly stuff like you see in the movies. We did what we had to do, and we snuck away as fast as we could.
They also couldn't have any basic hygiene routines.
And something else you should know, when you're out there in the bush like that, you do not brush your teeth, you do not shave, you do not bath, you do not do anything, because it's a smell that the enemy can smell. If you put your aftershave lotion on, you're done, because they don't wear it. So you had to blend as best as you could. I thought I'd throw that in there. That's kind of funny, but you know, after anywhere between 5 to 18 days in the woods, you were really glad to come back.
Years of serving gave Senior Michael Yoder many stories and lots of experience to share with us today. Most of his service was in Vietnam, where he served as a squad leader with a few other men. Michael Yoder's experiences being a squad leader were very rewarding for him. He said it was the thing he enjoyed the most out of his service. Senior Yoder had lots of training experience, so it made the most sense for him to be the squad leader. Senior Yoder said that his squad had good camaraderie going on. Living conditions in Vietnam were wet and damp. Senior Yoder said that the time he was out serving, he was in a bush. He had to hide himself and his men somewhat, so most of the time they hid in shrubbery while watching out for enemies. However, when him and his men would go back to the base, they had small buildings set up with sandbags for structure and canvas roofs. Later in the war, the living conditions got more sturdy, but Senior Yoder served at the beginning of the war, where the structures were just being figured out. During service, Senior Yoder engaged with enemies multiple times, although he tried his best not to. The more he engaged with the enemy, the more destruction was caused. His missions were typically during the daylight, because when he served, the military did not have the supplies or the technology to be able to see at night, so it would be pointless to serve all night, although his squad did keep consistent watch out, taking turns resting and watching.
If we had the equipment that these guys have today, wow, it would be a lot different, but we didn't. So daylight was our primary mission to observe. Nighttime was our primary mission, was to hide.
After his first time during service, he returned home for a short period of time, then returned to the service. When he went home, he saw his kids and realized he needed to support them financially, even though his wife worked as a beautician. Work was hard to find with the education that he had, so he decided to go back to the service. Many times while he was still at home, he missed serving and fell out of touch with society. Him and his wife agreed that it would be a good choice for him to serve again, or else they would have to move somewhere more urban. It would be a waste of schooling, because Senior Yoder had lots of specialized training and experience with the military. He also had almost every school available for him to attend, so he could join whatever branch he wanted and more options that he wanted to serve in. He never used his GI Bill since school was already free for him. When he was off duty, Senior Yoder stayed in touch with his friends, mostly by mail, and every once in a while called his wife on the telephone. He also went skiing while he was in Colorado and sometimes played baseball. Most of the time he would pick up other people's weekend duties so that his friends would be able to go home to see their family and friends. That way, when Senior Yoder wanted to go home to see his family, his friends would most likely take the weekend duty and he would be able to go home. Senior Yoder also recalled a few unique events from while he was in combat. There was a time when one of his men thought that they had been shot, but the bullet slightly missed him and hit his bottle of hot sauce. Also pretty uniquely, him and his men never did anything for good luck. They just prepared as well as they could and made their own luck. Senior Yoder said that his favorite part of his service was the last few months where he could go do more activities. Senior Yoder said that he was able to go swimming and relax. Senior Yoder said that he believed that the most rewarding part of his service. Although he also says that the things he experienced early in his service should not have been endured by any teenager and could not be made up for, and he doesn't like the idea of war. Senior Yoder also received many medals, but he never got called to receive them. He doesn't wear them out too often. He believes that medals belong to heroes and that he is not a hero. He received just as many achievements as the other men he served with. He served longer than most of the people he served with, but he had the same experience and same medals. The war ended in 1975, and he was in Arkansas helping train soldiers to go to Vietnam. Although he was home when the war ended, his last day of service was in 1997. Once his service ended and he was back home, he was received by his community and family. Senior Yoder recalled that everyone was glad to see him back at home, including his church, friends, and family. He found readjusting to civilian life a struggle, but since this wasn't the first time he was doing so, he found it a little bit easier. He couldn't do everything normal civilian would be able to, like going to fireworks shows, and he still has to come down from violent encounters that he had while in war. But he was welcomed warmly back to his town and eventually found a regular job that would keep him busy. Senior Yoder worked at the Union Hall, helping put machinery together and eventually making his way up the ranks ladder. Senior Yoder says that service changed him by teaching him responsibility and that family comes first. He says it gave him a better and greater appreciation of life. He learned not to take anything for granted and always be kind. Senior Yoder said not to get mad at people and not look down on certain people if they were different than you. He also says that in service and in combat, the men you serve with come first. He continued all friendships with every friend that he met in service. Senior Yoder believes that service made him more humble. He still treats people the same and will listen to what they have to say.
It taught me that family's first. And when you're in the situations of being in combat, the men you serve with come first.
The only legion or group that Senior Yoder belongs to is the local American Legion in town. Senior Yoder doesn't usually attend any reunions because him and his men were split up.